Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Pops Project of the Month. Today, making this tapered tang knife with amazing vintage micarta. Today, I'll show you how to make this knife. There's a story behind it. So here's the story. Last week, I went out to Pop's Knife Supply, sponsor of today's video, of course, and I said to Joey Berry, one of the co-owners, hey, teach me how to make a knife your way. And this knife is the result. Now, the basic idea here was that I wanted to kind of get outside my comfort zone, the normal way that I make knives, and, see somebody doing it in a completely different way. Now, there's an amazing amount of cool information in this video, so I want to get cranked up as quickly as I can, but the main point that I'd like to make here is that there's always something new out there to learn. I've been making knives for well over 20 years, and, I like to think I've learned a little bit about making knives by now, but I picked up a ton of stuff here. Now, this video was shot in my shop, but everything I'm doing here is based on my best efforts attempt to do things the way that Joey showed me up at the Pops shop. Now, I have no doubt that Joey's gonna watch this and he's gonna be like, I didn't do it that way, you dummy, but hopefully most of what you see will be pretty faithful to his approach. So Joey, if I forgot a few things or had to adapt my own gear along the way, my apologies. Big thanks to Joey for carving out a very long day to lead me through this project. All right, let's jump in. Joey starts every knife with a pattern, which he produces from micarta or plastic and hangs on the wall. Since he's a production guy, he wants the option to make 10, 20, or, if need be, a million identical designs. I produced this pattern using the knife that I made at Pops as a pattern for my pattern. So it's roughly based on Joey's pattern, but not exactly. Today's knife is made from 1084 steel. We'll start by slathering on some layout fluid. After it's dried, I'll score around the pattern with a carbide scribe. Joey stressed that he really presses down, leaving a deep gully with the scribe so that even if the layout fluid burns off, which is pretty common, there's still a nice clean line to follow. Then it's over to the grinder to rough in the profile. Joey does this on a large contact wheel using a reasonably worn, heavy grit belt. In this case, it's a 36 grit ceramic belt. The reason you want to use a worn belt is that if you really blast into a sharp edge, you just scrape off about half your abrasive in seconds. That's no good. At Pops, they have like 8 grinders lined up, allowing them to keep permanent setups so that you don't constantly have to change attachments. Now, we can't all do that, obviously, but it's something to think about if you want to produce multiple copies of a particular design. I'll change to a 120 grit belt and take the grind right up to the line until the line disappears. Next, Joey drills the handle holes. He likes a really light knife, so in addition to the holes for the pins and thong tube, he'll drill holes to lighten the tang. He starts by measuring the thin part of the knife, then scribing a line halfway between them. Obviously, the middle of the tang is wider, so that line is not going to be at the halfway point. For that center hole, he just eyeballs it a hair lower to make the pins look right. When you do this mathematically, it sometimes actually looks kind of funny. Over to the drill, where first he drills 1/8 inch starter holes. Then he goes to full size using a 1/4 inch drill. Pops has 3 drills in a row in their shop. Same idea as with the grinders. One running at a fast speed for skinny drill bits, one slower for larger diameter bits, and then one slower still that generally has a chamfer tool in it. Now,
Using a height gauge, I'll scribe grind lines for both the bevels and the tapered tang. We're aiming for 40 thousandths of an inch. These will give us indicators of how far to grind so that everything ends up symmetrical. Then on the grinder, I'll grind very short bevels down to those scribed lines on both the bevels and the end of the tang.
Today's video is, of course, sponsored by Pop's Knife Supply. Virtually everything that I used in today's build, including steel, abrasives, handle pins, thong tubes, epoxy, handle materials, all of it can be found at Pop's. Now, speaking of handle materials, they really have an unparalleled collection of handle scales and handle materials. Wood, bone, antler, G10, micarta, including vintage stock like the spectacular crosscut micarta that I'm using for this knife. Kind of a Pop specialty. So if you want to follow along with this particular project, hit up Pop's for all your supplies. As I've mentioned many times in the past, all four of the partners at Pop's, obviously including Joey Berry, who inspired today's knife, are knife makers. So they can guide you if you have questions about any of the materials that you need from them. popsknife.supplies.
Next, I'll turn to beveling the knife. Joey starts with a heavy grit ceramic in the 60 range. I go a little bit heavier, but that's just me. Joey also clamps a filing guide onto the blade at the ricasso to assure that the plunge lines are symmetrical. This is an excellent aid to grinding, and I totally forgot to do it. We'll be climbing the bevel all the way up to the spine. Joey stresses that his background as a hunter and outdoorsman biases him toward really sharp, thin-edged knives. The higher the grind and the thinner the edge, the better the knife cuts. Once he's pretty close to the spine, he'll jump to a higher grit belt, quitting when he's just kissing the spine with his grind. Next, Joey tapers the tang. He'll begin by using pretty much the same Bob Loveless type technique that I demonstrated in my Pop's video a few months back, but with a few refinements. Link in the cards if you want to see that. He'll prepare the way by using a small wheel to create a sort of gully down the tang. You want to sneak up reasonably close to where you intend the handle to end, but not too close. If you overshoot, obviously, then you pretty much have to scrap the knife. Then, turning to a large contact wheel, I'll enlarge that gully, working down to the scribed line. Joey stressed that you want to leave only the smallest margin around the tang face, and you want it to be very symmetrical. If it's not, it'll make it easy to grind asymmetrically in the next phase, and your tang will end up cockeyed. For the final push, he uses a pretty cool tool that he designed, derived from a similar tool used by Andy Roy. I made this one myself, and if things work out, I may be manufacturing more of them for Pops to sell, but that's not a done thing. Anyway, the basic idea is that if you have magnets in the body of the jig, along with a small nub or boss that will protrude through the furthest back 1/4 inch hole that acts as sort of a keeper so that the knife won't slip. It's a little hard to describe everything that Joey showed me about tapering the tang, but basically the tool allows you to apply pressure wherever you need it to taper the tang. You can push a little harder on the top, you can kind of rock it, you can go back and forth, and that way wherever you're pushing hardest is where you're going to grind the most. I'm using a flat platen here, grinding at a moderate speed. Joey uses a ceramic belt in the 80 grit range. You basically just want a symmetrical grind up roughly to the point where the handle ends. Once you've gotten close, you'll work your way up using higher grits, something more in the 220 grit range, to complete the taper. At this point, Joey rocks the blade tip toward the belt a hair, taking off any scale that may be on the blade and creating a nice clean surface finish for the ricasso. Now it's on to heat treating. Joey likes 1084 because it's a high quality steel that's also relatively forgiving to heat treat. Before heat treatment, Joey likes to clay up the blade with nuclear anti-scale, 2 layers. Having experimented with the stuff myself, I confirmed his admonitions that that second layer is really important. It makes a good bit of difference if you use 2 layers rather than 1. The idea here is to reduce the exposure of the steel to oxygen, reducing scale and decarburization. I'll take the blade to 1500 degrees, then quench for a few seconds in a fast quenching oil, then very quickly transfer to a plate quench vise. A little compressed air brings the heat down quickly for maximum hardness, while the plates keep the blade from warping. Once the blade goes into the tempering oven, it's a great time to get started on the handle scales. In this case, we're using a very old vintage micarta. See, micarta oxidizes over time, and that oxidized layer sort of creeps slowly inward over the decades, leaving a bark of darker micarta that gives visual interest to the material. In this case, the scales were cross-cut from a huge piece of micarta, leaving this interesting dark brown part at the end. I'll also use 2 layers of vulcanized fiber spacer material. As with anything that's going to be glued, surface prep is key. First, the materials are scuffed with sandpaper on a very flat machinist's block. Then, all surfaces are cleaned with acetone. Once this is done, you want to avoid any contact with fingers or potentially greasy surfaces. Using a gel cyanoacrylate glue, the scales are layered up and then clamped to a very flat surface. You definitely want to use rubber gloves when working with super glue. I'm using Gorilla brand, but Pops carries a CA glue called Instacure that I like a lot better. I bought some last time I was at Pops, but somehow it didn't make it into the bag I took home, so I was stuck with this stuff from Home Depot. A little spritz of activator assures you that the globs of squeeze out around the outside cure quickly.
Okay, so there was so much interesting detail and so much cool stuff that I learned from Joey in this build that this video is really running on pretty long, so I'm going to break it in 2. The first will come out obviously today, and then I'll put the next one out tomorrow. Anyway, I hope you've learned a lot so far, and there's more to come. All right, hang in there, and we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.